Hello, comrades, and welcome to another video on the Russian Revolution area of Study 1. This video is about the October Revolution and the events that took place in October that led to the revolution. So here's a quote from Lenin. He said, "History will not forgive us if we do not take power now." So Lenin is determined to take power from the provisional government. So, first of all, the 10th of October, there is a meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee. Here is an image to represent. Here's a visual source about that meeting. We've got Lenin here, Stalin, Trotsky. It seems like Felix Dzerzhinsky, who we haven't met yet, but we will talk about in Area of Study 2. And so this is a secret meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee. So 3 days after returning to Petrograd on the 7th of October, after Trotsky had announced to the provisional government all power to the Soviets, Lenin called a meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee to discuss staging an uprising against the provisional government. Lenin believed that if they waited any longer, a coalition socialist government might form that would marginalize the Bolsheviks. So that would be a coalition socialist government with the Mensheviks and the SRs. And he also believed that the proletariat was ready for a revolutionary uprising. They were sick of the continued war effort. They were still hungry due to the resources going to the war. And so he believed that they were ready. Trotsky favored waiting until the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets, which was due to take place in late October, and the committee, including Lenin, agreed. This meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee is often represented as a decisive plan to seize power. However, those meeting on the 10th of October agreed on the principle of an armed insurrection, but did not set an exact date. So this is a meeting of intent. The Military Revolutionary Committee, or Milrevkom. So as the German army continued its advance towards Petrograd, they captured Riga, which is the capital of Latvia, not too far from Petrograd. So in mid-October 1917, Kerensky ordered the Petrograd garrison to the northern front and began planning to evacuate Petrograd, creating fear and panic. Now, he ordered the garrison to the northern front for two reasons. Firstly, yes, to defend against Germany, but secondly, to push the Bolsheviks into an ill-advised and unplanned insurrection, because he knew that by ordering the Petrograd garrison out of Petrograd, he was taking soldiers who might be loyal to the Bolsheviks away from the capital. Now, soldiers of the garrison opposed the move, and the Bolsheviks accused the provisional government of plotting to abandon the capital and close down the Soviets. The Petrograd Soviet moved to defend the city against Germany, as well as the threat of counter-revolution. And on the 16th of October, a military revolutionary committee, the Milrevkom, was formed to take direct control of the city's garrison. The Milrevkom was largely directed by Bolsheviks. 3 out of the 5 in the executive committee were Bolsheviks, including Trotsky as chairman of the Milrevkom. The Milrevkom announced to Petrograd's workers and soldiers that it would defend the capital against Germany and defend the Soviet against any Kornilov-style coup. This is significant because the Bolsheviks now had effective control over the military in and around Petrograd. Kerensky fights back and Trotsky resists. So on the 23rd of October, Kerensky made his move against the Bolsheviks. He raised bridges linking Petrograd's working-class districts with the rest of the city, trying to cut off supply lines and cut off contact between the working-class districts and the rest of the city. He ordered the shutdown of Bolshevik printing presses, and he ordered the arrest of leading Bolsheviks and Milrevkom members. Trotsky decided that Kerensky was attempting an anti-Soviet counter-revolution, so he used the authority of the Milrevkom to seize control of the capital and arrest the government. So this happened just a week after the Milrevkom was formed, and Trotsky was using his power as chairman of the Milrevkom to fight back against Kerensky's actions. On the 24th of October, Red Guards, remember they came into existence during the Kornilov affair when they were it turned into an armed militia to defend against Kornilov. So the Red Guards and Milrevkom soldiers took over the bridge checkpoints, recaptured the printing presses, and seized control of strategic buildings and offices. The provisional government was confined to the Winter Palace, and Kerensky fled Petrograd the next day. Now, Kerensky's ignorance of the Milrevkom's commitment to defend the Petrograd Soviet inadvertently started the October Revolution. Here are a couple of historical interpretations. So the first one comes from Richard Pipes, and this comes from his an article he wrote in 1992 called "The Great October Revolution as a Clandestine Coup d'etat." He said, "October was not a revolution, but a classic coup d'etat planned in the dead of night on October 10th and executed 2 weeks later." A coup d'etat, is, for those that don't know, is a military takeover of the government. The seizure of power, masterminded by Trotsky, was a model coup or putsch, conceived and carried out in the strictest secrecy. It eschewed barricades and mob actions in favor of surgical strikes against the organ of the state. It was so successfully camouflaged as a transfer of power to the All-Russian Congress of Soviets that virtually no one, including the rank and file of the Bolshevik Party, had any inkling of what had happened. So Pipes is saying that this was not some incredible revolution led by the workers or the rank and file. It was instead a coup between the Soviet and the Petrograd and the provisional government. On the other hand, we've got Alexander Rabinovich, who says only in the wake of the government's direct attack on the left was an armed uprising of the kind envisioned by Lenin feasible. So this is different. He's saying that this is directly due to the government's attack on the 23rd of October. For the Petrograd masses, to the extent that they supported the Bolsheviks in the overthrow of the provisional government, did so not out of any sympathy for strictly Bolshevik rule, but because they believed the revolution and the Congress to be in imminent danger. So two different interpretations of the October Revolution. So let's have a look at the chronology of the October Revolution. So storming of the Winter Palace. Now, first fun fact, and I promise this won't happen to you, but this famous visual source showing a heroic Bolshevik leading all these Milrevkom and Red Guards into the Winter Palace. This image was used in a History Revolutions exam a few years ago. However, it was accidentally a photoshopped image of this very visual source with robots storming the Winter Palace. Promise that won't happen to you. But yes, this image shows an idealized version of the storming of the Winter Palace. So let's look at the chronology. At midnight on the 25th of October, 1917, so sort of the night of the 24th of October, Lenin arrives at the Smolny Institute, which is where the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviet is being held. At 2 a.m., the Bolshevik Central Committee meets and draws up plans for a seizure of power. At 9 a.m., Kerensky flees the Winter Palace. At 10 a.m., Lenin releases a statement declaring the overthrow of the provisional government. At 9:40 p.m., so about 12 hours later, the cruiser Aurora signals the start of the assault on the Winter Palace, using its cannons to fire on the Winter Palace. At 10:40 p.m., an hour later, the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets opens. At 11 p.m., cannons of fortress open fire. Cannons of the fortress open fire on the Winter Palace. At 1 a.m., Trotsky condemns the Socialist Revolutionaries and Menshevik delegates of the Soviet Congress. Remember, they believed that the SRs and Mensheviks wanted to form a coalition socialist government. Martov leads the remaining Menshevik delegates in a protest walkout. He was the leader of the Mensheviks. At 2:10 a.m., on the 26th of October, this is now, Bolshevik troops led by Antonov Ovsienko arrest ministers of the provisional government. At 3 a.m. on the 26th, news of the capture of the Winter Palace is announced to the Soviet Congress. At 6 a.m., there is a recess of the Soviet Congress called. So people went away and rested. And then at 8:40 p.m. That night, the Soviet Congress reopens. Lenin addresses the Congress and delivers his first two decrees on peace and land, which we will talk about in Area of Study 2. So the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets, on the 25th of October at 10:40 p.m., the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets opened. First, Menshevik and SR delegates spoke, proposing the formation of a socialist coalition government and denouncing the actions of the Bolsheviks, i.e. the actions against the provisional government storming of the Winter Palace. At 1 a.m. on the 26th of October, most Menshevik and SRs joined in walkout protests against events unfolding at the Winter Palace. Historian Robert Service argues that this walkout offered only ineffective disapproval rather than a true challenge. It in fact had the opposite effect of what they had intended. Instead of being this challenge to the authority of the Bolsheviks, it just left the room blank, left the room empty of Mensheviks and SRs. And so Trotsky rose next and gave one of his most famous speeches. His speech at the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets on the 26th of October, 1917. He said, "A rising of the masses requires no justification. What has happened is an insurrection and not a conspiracy. We hardened the revolutionary energy of the Petersburg workers and soldiers. The masses followed our banner and our insurrection was victorious. And now we are told, renounce your victory, make concessions, compromise. With whom, I ask? No, here no compromise is possible. To those who have left and those who tell us to do this, we must say, you are miserable bankrupts. Your role is played out. Go back where you ought to go, into the dustbin of history." So he's speaking directly to the Mensheviks and SRs that walked out of the Congress, saying that they belong in the dustbin of history. To all workers, soldiers, and peasants. So news of the fall of the Winter Palace arrived around 3 a.m. A manifesto written by Lenin proclaiming the establishment of Soviet power was read out. It said, "To all workers, soldiers, and peasants, supported by an overwhelming majority of the workers, soldiers, and peasants, and basing itself on the victorious insurrection of the workers and the garrison of Petrograd, the Congress hereby resolves to take governmental power into its own hands." Here is a visual source of Lenin speaking at the Second All Congress of Soviets. And finally, we have the formation of the Soviet government. So early in the morning of the 27th of October, Lenin announced to the Congress that a new Soviet government was to be formed, the Council of People's Commissars, otherwise known as the Sovnarkom. All the ministers or commissars were Bolsheviks. So first we've got Alexandra Kollontai, who will become a significant individual in Area Study 2. She was Commissar of Social Welfare. We've got Joseph Stalin, Commissar of Nationalities. Alexander Shliapnikov, Commissar of Labor. Anatoly Lunacharsky, I can't pronounce his name, Commissar for Enlightenment, so focused on arts and education, and Trotsky as Commissar of Foreign Affairs. Lenin was the new government's chairman. A new Soviet Central Executive Committee was also voted in, consisting of 29 left SRs, 6 Mensheviks, and 62 Bolsheviks. So very much in favor of the Bolsheviks. To appease people's concerns over the Bolsheviks holding too much power, considering all of the ministers in the new government were Bolsheviks, and 62 of the 85, my maths isn't very good, 87. Now I'm just stuck on maths. Forget it. 62, a good like 2/3 of the Central Executive Committee, Soviet Central Executive Committee, were Bolsheviks. Trying to appease people's concerns, Lenin claimed that the Sovnarkom would only rule until the Constituent Assembly convened in early 1918, and that the proposed November elections would go ahead as planned. So remember that when the provisional government came in, they had no mandate to rule, and they had promised for a Constituent Assembly to have a proper election to find out who the government was going to be. Lenin has promised that this would go ahead as planned. So let's briefly talk about the leadership of Lenin and Trotsky in carrying out the October Revolution. So firstly, it could be said that Trotsky organized the Bolshevik seizure of power while Lenin inspired it. So Lenin's ideas fueled the revolution. His charisma at the Central Committee meeting was central to the shift from defense to attack against the provisional government. That is the 10th of October secret meeting of the Bolshevik Central Committee. And he announced the founding of an exclusively socialist government on the 27th of October. Trotsky, as chairman of the Milrevkom, he was responsible for the initial military response to Kerensky's moves on the 23rd of October. Trotsky planned and directed the uprising against the provisional government, and he provoked the remaining Menshevik delegates to leave the Second Congress of Soviets. So Trotsky was very active in the October Revolution, while Lenin was charismatic and inspiring. So Trotsky argued that Lenin's contribution was essential. Here's a quote from Trotsky. He said, "Had I not been present in 1917, the October Revolution would still have taken place, on the condition that Lenin was present and in command. If neither Lenin nor I had been present, there would have been no October Revolution. The leadership of the Bolshevik Party would have prevented it from occurring." While on the Trotsky side, Stalin and Trotsky later became bitter enemies. Stalin ordered the assassination of Trotsky many years after our study. But Stalin outlined Trotsky's role in the October Revolution in an article in November 1918. He said, "All practical work in connection with the organization of the uprising was done under the immediate direction of Comrade Trotsky, the president of the Petrograd Soviet. It can be stated with certainty that the party is indebted primarily and principally to Comrade Trotsky for the rapid going over of the garrison to the side of the Soviet and the efficient manner in which the work of the Military Revolutionary Committee was organized." So high praise for both Lenin and Trotsky. So this brings us to the end of Area of Study 1 and the beginning of Area of Study 2. So Area of Study 2 starts on the 27th of October as the Sovnarkom is announced, and some of their first actions are going to be on this very same day, their decree on peace and land. So Area of Study 2 is all about the consequences of the revolution. So you will find me in another video shortly, and I hope you found this one interesting and useful, and I will see you next time.